Does nothing happen when you give your engine a little more gas? The throttle trigger and cable assembly could be the source of your grief. The throttle trigger allows you to control the engine's RPMs. When you squeeze the trigger, the motion is transferred through the cable to the throttle plate on the carburetor. The cable pulls the throttle open, allowing more air and fuel into the engine. The most common problem with the throttle trigger and cable assembly is a broken cable, especially at the cast ends where it mounts to the trigger and to the carburetor. Cable wear is greatly accelerated by rust, usually caused by storing the tool out in the elements. Replacing the throttle trigger and cable assembly is a repair you can do yourself, and I'm going to show you how. I'll begin by removing the cable ties that secure the throttle cable and the ignition cable to the handle. Now I'll go ahead and remove the throttle trigger assembly from the handle assembly. It's held in place with a single bolt. Now I can remove the throttle cable from the 5 cable clips along the handle. Now I remove the air filter cover to get access to the carburetor. Now I'll remove the throttle cable from the throttle rotor on the carburetor. To do that, I'll just rotate the rotor by hand, and a small screwdriver is helpful here to rotate the swivel. Then I can pull the cable away from the swivel. There's a nut that secures the throttle cable to the carburetor. I'll loosen the nut and then unscrew the cable. Now I can install our new throttle cable. I'll thread the end of the throttle cable shaft onto the bracket on the carburetor. I want to thread it on until it's about right in the middle of this threaded portion of the shaft. About right there. And now I can tighten up the retaining nut. Now I can install the throttle cable back into the swivel on the carburetor. The easiest way to do this is to rotate the swivel around until it's in line with the cable, and so that the end of the swivel that has the larger hole in it is on the same side as the terminated end on the cable. With the cable inside that groove, now I can just simply pull the trigger on the throttle cable, and it should lock itself in place pretty much on its own. Like that. Now at this point we can go ahead and reinstall the air filter cover. Start with the inner plate, followed by the cover. Now I'll reattach the throttle cable and the ignition switch bracket back to the handle. Just line everything up and secure it with the screw. Now I'll snap the throttle cable back into the clips along the handle. Now I'll check the travel on the throttle trigger. Pull it a couple of times, and what I see is it isn't retracting down as far as it should, so we'll need to make an adjustment. I'll loosen the adjuster so that I can rotate it, and then I'll rotate this upper portion of the cable until the throttle trigger starts to come down. About right there. Test it a couple of times. That feels good. So now I can go ahead and tighten the adjuster back up to lock it in place. it's good to go. And I'll finish up by resecuring the ignition wire to the handle with some cable ties.